Hi guys, because of EOC testing, we're going to do some flipped classroom lessons. We'll go over all of this in class and I'll give you a lot of examples and we'll discuss it. I'll answer any questions you have, but to speed up the process a little bit, I think that the flipped classroom is going to work really well just because of the lack of time that we have. So with public policy, we're going to start with economic policy, and that consists of fiscal and monetary policy. Here are the essential questions that we're going to be focusing on as we talk. And then public policy is just trying to solve the nation's problems. So in this specific case is, what are the economic problems? What's unemployment? What are we going to do to counter some of these problems? So the question is, how much responsibility should the government have? If you put all of these things on the political spectrum, realize that the more government involvement you have, that will be from the middle to the left, and then the less government involvement that you have will be from the middle to the right. And so capitalism would go on the left and capitalism would go on the right rather, and communism would go on the left. So our policy today is somewhere in between capitalism and socialism. We do have a hands-off approach or a laissez-faire approach, and that's Adam Smith's ideas. But we also have some government control, and the government is involved in some way. So we'll talk about Keynesian economics and where that fits in when we get to class. The way I remember fiscal policy is fiscal starts with an F, and so does federal budget. So fiscal, federal budget, that should help you not get confused with monetary policy if you can remember it that way. So what we're going to talk about is making change in the government's method of spending money and raising money. So today the government spends more than $3.3 trillion. Think of all of the services that you get from the government, whether it's welfare or money towards education or defense spending. We'll talk about all of the categories in class. So the budget is the document that decides, how much we can spend and how much based on the revenues that we're getting. And we use the fiscal year as the time period covered in the budget. So a fiscal year for the government is October 1st to September 30th of the following year. So where does the money come from? Most of the money comes from federal income taxes. Federal income taxes are a progressive tax, which means the more you make, the more you are taxed. And that's because of the 16th Amendment. We also have money coming in from social insurance taxes. If you have a job, you pay money into Social Security and into Medicare. That's about 37%. And then the rest of that, the government borrows. We do have some smaller taxes, the excise tax, corporate tax, estate and gift tax, and tariffs. But those make up a smaller percentage of where the income comes from. Where does the money go? Most of the money, 70% of the budget goes to uncontrollables, things that we can't control. That includes the national debt and entitlements. Entitlements are things such as Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, veterans benefits, and government pensions. Things that we can't get rid of, things that the government is always going to pay out. So you can't cut one of those things drastically or on a whim. It has to go through Congress because a lot of people depend on those entitlement programs. National defense makes up about 18% of the budget, and then the rest is discretionary spending, which is, it could be education, crime, NASA, any of the rest of the bureaucracy spending that we've talked about. So the deficit and the debt are two different things. I don't want you to get them confused. The deficit is when the expenditures exceed the revenues. So we have spent more than we've received. The debt is currently at about 17 trillion, and the debt is the total amount of deficits. So if you add up all of those deficits, how much have we accrued? So to reduce the debt, politicians either advocate cutting spending or raising taxes. This gives you a look at what the deficit has looked like from year to year. So the way this happens is that the president proposes the budget or prepares the budget for Congress, and the Office of Management and Budget and the Executive Office of the President helps the president prepare the budget. Then the Congressional Budget Office evaluates what the president has prepared and Congress votes on it. And then Congress is the end-all be-all to who has to pass the budget. And then, of course, the president would sign it. So this process starts about 19 months before the fiscal year begins. The Gramm-Rudman Balanced Budget Act called for automatic spending cuts, but basically the president and Congress still found ways to spend, so it wasn't very effective. Sometimes the president will use supply-side tax cuts. There's a need for less regulation in the market, lower taxes, which would create incentives for investment, which would then make greater economic productivity and produce more tax revenue. This is known as Reaganomics, and what Ronald Reagan did was he used the supply-side tax cuts and domestic budget cutting, and then he increased the military spending. The money supply was controlled, but it cut inflation, but allowed the interest rates to rise. And personal income taxes were cut, but Social Security taxes were increased. So large deficits were created, unemployment was lowered, and there was a rise in business activity because of this. All right, we're going to switch over to monetary policy. Monetary policy is controlling the supply of the money, and the group that controls the supply of money is the Federal Reserve. So anytime we talk about monetary policy, the Federal Reserve is the group that makes monetary policy. So the national government has the power to coin money, and so that involves controlling the supply of money and the cost of borrowing the money. The Federal Reserve System is known as the Fed. It's the central banking system. It's where the bankers go to bank and they set interest rates. It's currently chaired by Ben Bernanke, and Janet Yellen is the new Fed president. It's organized into 12 districts. There's a board of governors, 7 members in DC, and they're selected by the president and confirmed by the Senate, so that is part of checks and balances. However, once they get that job, they are completely independent of Congress. And they act independently because we don't want the president, we don't want Congress making decisions or trying to influence politically the Fed, because that could have bad implications for our economy. So they make decisions independently, and they do that again so that they don't have any outside politics influencing their decisions, because the economy needs to be stable and doesn't need to be influenced by politics. So the Fed has 2 main jobs. They supervise the operations of the banks, and then they determine the money and credit policies. They use 3 tools. The first tool is the discount rate. They can raise or lower the discount rate. We'll talk about it in class. The second tool is they can raise or lower the reserve requirement. Again, we'll talk about it in class. And the third tool is they could buy or sell government bonds. And so all of those tools they use to try to keep inflation in check, or to increase investments, or to increase spending in the economy, et cetera, et cetera. It's all of the tools that they use to make the economy stable for to have a good economy. So we'll talk about some examples in class. All right, guys, thanks so much for listening. Do well on your EOCs, but at the same time, we got a lot of work to do before the AP test. All right, thanks. See ya.